Because he starts out down here. And the next note should be probably here, right? But he puts it up an octave. And that's interesting because you don't expect it to be in that octave place. And because of that, it does two things. It's surprising, because by now you know things are arising by fourths, and you're used to the idea. So this little change refreshes the fourths, but it also opens a gap between the lowest note, this one, and here. There's a gap where nothing's playing. And later on in the music, the gap is going to be filled in. That's a very useful technique in composition, a gap fill, we call it. It happens all the time in music. In this composition, that gap from here to here, look, he spends time there waiting, and then he fills it in, but not with that voice, but with this voice, see? And then there's been a gap here, a gap by the low notes just hanging on, and so then this instrument grabs it, because that's the same note, by the way. He's reading an octave lower. You write the bass flat. This is really an octave lower. So there actually is a gap between this. It's not just a fourth. There's a low note and then an octave and a fourth between this. And so this is filling in that gap just the way the one coming down is, except it's going twice as fast. So those two features are giving a sense of closure. So when we get to this passage, we feel we've filled in the registral space, and then he's ready to go to new ideas. Began to write in softs and louds in the music. That's all they wrote. They wrote forte, that's Italian for loud or strong, and piano, which means soft. And so the players, when they perform, dynamics are extremely important. Another thing is these accents that are here. Okay? The accents produce something interesting because these notes are 5 notes apart, so it sends a little pattern of 5 here, a little pattern of 5 here, and then rest at that point. This comes into effect at the same time, so there's a pattern of 2 and 2 coming up. So there are two kind of like corvi things that are happening at once there, at the same time. See, all of this is going on at the same time, but the corvis are not producing tension per se because they're coming to this point right here. But this point is not on a downbeat or any place, so it sounds still like it hasn't resolved. This upward gesture cuts across this one so that even though we have this resolution we're talking about the registers, we have going on further some new material to take care of. Because this line is going up, there's been a crescendo here, see this? And this here, and now we've got a new chord, and here's where this chord lands, gives us a new sense of resolution. In different parts of the rock, but notice that this is E flat and gamma, etc. And this one is E flat, C, so that's mi, sa, mi, sa, etc. This figure here is actually the same as this transposed. It's the same idea because the mode itself, the 5/5 mode, permits transposition. I can tell you why that's the case, but here we have this. And actually, they're just parts of 2 scales. The scales like this, take them apart. So it's an example of what we call fragmentation. But in addition to that, the reason why this works is because this thing by itself, if you take the notes apart, is really fourths. See, so idea. And then this one is another expression of fourths. So these two things, the fourth are fourth related. That's the reason why these notes are connected like that and why in the same figure. That is the underlying process, the idea that's behind it is because this raga is based on fourths. And the opening of the piece expresses that and says it. In Western music, timbre is often used structurally. And that's what's happening here. The use of the pizzicato is making sure that this section really is set off from the other one. So we really know that this section is a second part of the piece. No one can deny that, because you can say the first part's ario, the second part's pizzicato. Okay, and then there's this new idea, which is 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. This is, of course, the beats of the tala at twice speed. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, so da. Okay, so that motif is justified by the fact it's coming out of the tala, and then it occurs again and again and again. Notice, remember I said there was a gap up there? Notice how the music is moving up to fill in the gap? So that happens here. Oh, I have to say one more little thing. He could have just stopped this music here, like that. You know, it's just how all instruments just stop and then the pizzicato can come in. But he has this overlap. That's called an elision. Elision in music. It's overlap. It's like dovetailing or linking. And that's a good technique because it allows us to lose these two sections which are different together. If we didn't have the overlap, this would be a little more abrupt. It wouldn't be bad. But the fact is that to keep the smoothness of the music, the overlap's useful. Now all the pizzicatos are down and in 6. This sets up the tala very nicely. Notice the new notes that are coming in? That's not the tonic note, that's the fourth note. And these ostinatos, you know, those good little ostinatos, and he's added these offbeats too, which is cool. So you got that's a little subtlety but it's coming out of this. Whatever those notes are, it's not all the cases, but most of them is the bass lines through there. And by putting things on the offbeat again, makes it stabilizes and destabilizes, because this is very stabilizing. Da 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 da, dee da 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 da, dee da 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 da, destabilizing. So there's always things in flux in compositions. Something is getting stable, another thing is destabilizing. Sometimes they all come together, and when that happens, one sets a climax. When they're happening at different rates of speed against each other, then we call that textural counterpoint. Because that's what it is. It's not notes against each other, but it's different textures that are intervening in different ways. And really that's what's important in this. But this idea that's right here is also known in the West as an Alberti bass. Here's that. This takes this idea we had before, da, 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 and now it's half speed, da, 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 da. And now, look, finally we get this high F, that's the highest note so far. Okay, so there's been an overall process of getting higher and higher in this piece by little terraces. Okay? And all of this music is going down, and all this music went up. Notice how no matter what happens, he's careful to end on the C in the song. Make sure that we don't sense that this is a different raga. You see, there's no drone in this piece to establish this all the time. And by not having the drone in, that's a new level of complexity, because now, in your mind, you could possibly think of another note being drawn in all over the place. Okay, So that's the kind of an analysis of the architecture, I like to call it, of a composition.